Hello and welcome to today's episode of Rainer on Leadership, your online home for leadership lessons and advice for the local church. I'm your host, Sam Rainer. I have with me my father, Thom Rainer, the founder and CEO of Church Answers. And we are beginning a little kind of mini series that I'm excited about. You know why I'm excited about it, Dad?
Well, there are a lot of reasons you should be excited about it. One thing is you have a book that is totally connected to it.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yes.
Oh, I was wondering what you were headed to, but also this information we could not. Well, we actually could not pack it into 10 podcasts, but 3 is going to give them a good taste of it. And we're going to say, what are some things you need to be looking for in a church revitalization? So, maybe the name for the book and for this particular podcast series should be the Church Revitalization Checklist. Yes, checklist.
I love checklists, but before we get into exactly what my new book is and what we mean by a revitalization checklist, let me tell you about one of our favorite organizations on the planet, Tyndale. Tyndale is partnering with Operation Worship to get Bibles into the hands of our troops. Every day, thousands of soldiers and military families ask for God's word to fight fear, stress, anxiety, and depression. In this holiday season, you can give hope to our troops by sending them an Operation Bible. Just $6. $6 is enough to put a Bible in the hands of a military member. These Bibles are printed in the United States, then shipped to military chaplains throughout the world, who then deliver them directly to our brave service members. More than 1.5 million Operation Worship Bibles have been distributed to military personnel around the world. How do you do all this? Visit deploybibles.com. Again, deploybibles.com. You can make your tax-deductible donation there. What better thing, Dad? Supporting our military and getting Bibles into the hands of troops. Tyndale is just crushing it. I think this is an awesome ministry.
And think about it, Sam. They could put some type of business proposition here. They could sell a product. It could be more profitable, if you will, to put something else in this sponsorship slot. But they want to talk about giving Bibles away.
I love it. I love the heart of Tyndale. Just an incredible organization. Been working with them for a little bit now, and I have yet to encounter somebody I don't like there. So that's that says a lot. Don't know if they like me or not. I assume they do, but I'm a hard case. But
well,
and so are you.
we have been with them for about 2 months now. We started the 1st of November, and now we're at the end of December, so we're about there. And so here we are, about to go into a new year, 2022. Just boom, hit us like that. I'm not going to give all the cliches about time and how fast it's going, and the fact that it's going so fast. Next thing that happens, I'm dead. So I won't get.
I thought there was a '60s song coming somewhere in there. You sounded like you were.
It is, but I was trying not to do it. It's time is on my side by the Rolling Stones.
Okay,
but I'm not going to do that one. Does anybody really know what time it is? Does anybody really care? Chicago.
It is 4:17 p.m. Eastern time.
December 28th, 2021 is when this podcast released. You may be listening to it later, or you may be watching it on YouTube later. We are going to talk about the things you need to check off in revitalization, and we're going to go through a 3-part series, but we will continue to mention that Sam has a brand new book out called the Church Revitalization Checklist. It's still pre-order time as far as I know. We're recording this ahead of December 28th. It's supposed to be released in January, but we know it'll be available for pre-order. Congratulations, Sam.
Thank you. I am thrilled about this book. Took me long enough to write it, so I'm glad that it's out there for people.
You narrated it too, didn't you?
I did, and that's a whole nother story. I did an audio book version as well. And listen, the audio engineers, Tyndale, everyone's been so gracious and generous. But let me tell you, 2 full days in studio, reading your own words into a microphone. Torture is the word I would use. But I want people to buy the book, so I don't really want to say too much negative about my own reading ability.
I'll go in and tell the story that both you and Amy, well, Akeem too. Sometimes I don't see him on the screen. So Akeem, I'm sorry, I forgot about you. I recorded a book for another publisher many years ago called Good to Great Churches. Jim Collins had given me permission to use that title, Good to Great, and I did Good to Great Churches. And I narrated the whole book. And I was in a recording studio for 3 days. 3 days.
I talk faster than you do.
You talk faster, and I made more mistakes than you did. And they said, "Can you redo that sentence?" No. And they made me redo my sentence, and it took me 3 days to do it, 2.5, 3 days. And so when it's over, huge relief. Then I get contacted by Jim Collins' lawyer. Said, you really can't use that title. It's trademarked. What do I do? And I won't say that he articulated, that's my problem, not yours, but essentially that's what we ended up with. We had to change the name of the book. It became Breakout Churches.
It was a good book.
Yes, but that means every page changed. They said, well, we need to go back and record this again. I said, let's get a professional narrator. So I have never had a narrated book on the market.
Well, I've got one up on you. And let me tell you, when you are recording an audiobook, what's fascinating to me is you have headphones on and you hear a little click. Hey, and the guy was so polite. He's like, "Would you back up a little bit and re-record that?" And I'm just like, "Okay, fine." And you'll read a little further. Click. Could you repeat that, please? And so not only that, there is somebody on the other side of a glass wall having to sit there for 2 days and listen to you record, and they're sitting there reading the manuscript while you're speaking it. And I just want to be like, I hope that whoever that audio engineer is makes a boatload more money than I do off this book, because he deserves it. That must have been awful.
We're going down all kind of paths, but I got my story on this one too. The predecessor to Church Consultation University was the College of Church Consultation, and we did VHS tapes and sent them out. That was the predecessor to it. And I'm in a studio recording, and I cannot see the recording technician. I know he's in another room and he's taking it all down. And I'm talking, all of a sudden I hear he fell asleep, and he was snoring so loud that it was on the recording. And so I said, Chris.
I didn't put him to sleep. I didn't do that.
He was totally out of it. He was really embarrassed, but it was
all right. Well, hey, let's
get into the checklist.
Let's do this 3-part journey. We've got this episode. We have 2 more that will come after this one. So be looking at the titles. You'll see part 1, part 2, part 3, and we're going to begin this idea of church revitalization, which, by the way, wasn't even really a thing 20 years ago. You just didn't hear that phrase. People were revitalizing churches, and they've always done that, just as a field of study. It's
given credibility to pastors to go into difficult churches, because they're saying, I'm doing a revitalization. It used to be, you're going to a dying church, you're not wanted. But now you're doing revitalization.
Right. It was almost like you were on the outside if you went to one of these churches. Like, why would you want to go there? What are you doing there? And now there's a little bit more of a realization of, hey, as I begin my book, if God can save any person, he can save any church. And I believe that. And I believe that every church is worth fighting for. And this book, by the way, was originally titled The Other Side of Tomorrow. And we had to go back and forth with the publisher, and they ended up being right about the title. I've learned publishers.
They were so right about
publishers.
The Other Side of Tomorrow. Oh, let's get that book.
Listen, that's the theme. So before you start making fun of me, that's the whole theme, is that there is a
great name. It's a terrible title.
I like the title. But we ended up settling on the checklist theme, which I think is right and good, and it's more clear. But there is a brighter tomorrow. You can get on the other side of all of this, and that's what the book's about, and that's what the checklist is going to help you understand. And where we're going to begin with this is you have to be willing to hit the reset button. You're not pausing anymore. There was a season during the pandemic where everybody just paused. We froze. We had to. We didn't know what was going on. But now it's time to hit that reset button. I think we're in a land of great opportunity when it comes to church revitalization.
And when you talk about hitting the reset button instead of pause, the first issue that arises is the issue of change. How do you address change? First thing on the checklist, let's address change. What would you say, Sam?
Yeah, I would say that things have always been changing. So ironically, there's some irony here. Like, hit the reset button. You've got a great opportunity. Well, that's kind of always been the case. We've always had these culture shifting moments that I don't know that the church has been as good to capture and has often ignored. You think back to things like the civil rights movement. You think back to the AIDS, pandemic, which was a thing, and you think to 9/11, and a lot of these things are societal events that I'm mentioning. But sometimes even internally in churches, you have culture shifting crises that cause people to stop, ponder, think, and say, what are we doing and why are we doing this? Well, we're in one of those moments. And and it's not like this is the only opportunity that you will ever have. It's not like this is the greatest opportunity of all time. It's not that. I don't want to speak in hyperbole, even though I always do. But we're in one of those moments. We don't know when we're going to have another one of these moments. You don't know when your church is going to be as flexible as it is now. And yeah, when you're talking about change, I would just say, your core is likely stronger than ever. So if you've got people that have stuck with you through all of this, those are some strong people. If you've
Absolutely.
got some, I call them like weekly saints, man. They're there all the time, and if they've been with you through this whole pandemic, they may be a little tired, but they're likely stronger than ever, and they're likely more supportive than ever. So now is the time to say, okay, let's hit the reset button. Let's ask ourselves this question: who are we as a church, and where are we really going, and what do we really want to do in our community? And I think congregations are more willing to hear leaders out on that answer than they have been in quite some time.
We're talking about the Church Revitalization Checklist. It is the name of our podcast series. It is also the name of a new book by Sam Rainer. As of this podcast, you can pre-order it in a week or two from this podcast. The order will be fulfilled, but it's about to be released in January of 2022. The Church Revitalization Checklist is also a 3-part series that we are doing at Rainer on Leadership. Part 1 of this series is, and of 3, is hit the reset button, not pause. And the first checklist we did was the checklist of change. Now we start talking about the checklist of action and how we respond. Cultural Christianity is dead, which means you're not going to get that many people who show up to church just because it's culturally expected of them. So the next thing on the checklist, Sam, is talking about this thing called the Great Commission or evangelism, which has become anemic in too many churches.
Yeah, I actually had somebody ask me the question earlier this week. It was on another interview, another podcast, and they said, okay, if you're going to whittle everything down to one thing, and I thought it was a great question. All right, give me one thing for churches. What is it? What should churches be doing? So all this revitalization talk, if you could get it down to just one thing, what is it? I said, that's very simple. Churches need to have an outward focus. And every church that's unhealthy, this is what's lacking. There may be some other things. There may be some other things that are causing them trouble. But inevitably, the common thread that ties every single church in trouble together is a lack of an outward focus. Because churches that are thinking outwardly, those other issues tend to resolve themselves. And so what needs to lead in every church is evangelism. It's the Great Commission. It's the idea that our church exists not as a destination point for crowds, but rather as a vehicle into the community, from the neighborhood into the nations. So let's get churches moving outward. And it could be something as simple as our Pray and Go resource, which is one of our most popular resources. You can check the show notes for a link there. And okay, so we're going to get around, we're walk the community, and we're going to pray. And we've got a whole program around that to help you accomplish that in the best way possible. Okay, that's one option. People inviting others to church, adopting a local school, anything that gets you thinking about your neighbors, moving towards your neighbors, serving your neighbors, and ultimately sharing Christ with your neighbors. This is the core of church revitalization. It is what is absent in just about every church that is unhealthy.
On the checklist, you deal with something that if you didn't create the topic, you certainly got it out there in such a way that people had not heard about it before. I give you credit for it. The attendance frequency issue. We've talked about it many times on the podcast. We've written about it, but it is a critical part of the revitalization checklist.
Yeah, so evangelism would be those you need to reach. Attendance frequency. So those are the people outside the church. Attendance frequency are those inside the church. These are people that are, for the most part, members. And I realize not every church has a has a membership can be a thing that is viewed differently in churches. I understand that, but you have people that's their home. We like to talk about church membership and high expectations here at Church Answers, but you've got the people inside the church. We'll say they're part of the body, and they're not as connected as they used to be. They're distant. They're not as frequent. They're not coming as much. And this is one of the number one reasons why churches decline. Because if you have everybody there every week, you're doing well. But if you have everyone there every other week, which is average, you're half the size on a Sunday. So,
True.
and you would think that, every other week, well, that's not too, a lot of pastors would say, yeah, it's not too bad. There are people that are much worse than that. At least they're in church 25 weeks a year, whatever it is, 26 weeks a year. And it's like, okay. But if they were there 50 weeks a year, your church is literally, on average, half the size. And people they're not giving as much. They're not reading their Bibles as much. They're not in community as much. They're not part of a group as much. They're not learning as much. In fact, they're doing all of those things half as much on average, which means they're progressing in their faith. It's 100% more slowly. So we've got to deal with this issue of attendance frequency. We've got to get people that were coming 1 out of 4 weeks. Let's get them to 2 out of 4 weeks. If they're coming 2 out of 4 weeks, let's get them to 3 out of 4 weeks. I don't want to be a legalist about this. I don't want to equate church attendance as the end all thing, but it is an important issue, and it's something that a lot of churches are lacking in right now. People have just kind of faded a little bit, even if they're still connected.
We are talking about the Church Revitalization Checklist, a 3-part series in the Rainer on Leadership podcast. This is part 1 of 3. Hit the reset button, not pause. And it is also a brand new book by Sam Rainer, Tyndale Publishing, in partnership with Church Answers. Do you realize, Sam, that, I guess Post-Quarantine Church was the first, but in the new ongoing relationship, this is the first book in the Church Answers Tyndale relationship. Pretty cool. What's coming out.
I'm thrilled about that.
So we go down the checklist, and again, you can see the link in the show notes on pre-ordering the book. It'll be to you in a week or two if you're listening to this on December 28th. If you're listening to this in January or later, you can probably order the book and get it to you immediately. Checklist number 4. We're going to cover a lot of them in this series. I love this. The reset only works with realistic optimism. You cannot be a revitalizer without God-given optimism.
Yeah, and the key there is God-given. I think that you've phrased it appropriately. I will say this. I don't think you can be a leader of anything if you're a pessimist. I think by design, leaders are optimists, because I define leadership, and this is in part, this is not in whole, but I define leadership as taking people to a better place. Leaders help people get to a better place. And that's an oversimplification of leadership. I know that, but that's a good part of what you're doing. And the only way that you're going to get people to a better place is through optimism, believing that things will get better, believing that you can get people to a better place, believing that even if times are tough and even if you face some of the worst trials, that God is still in it and God will still do great things. And so I don't want to, what's the phrase, Pollyannish? Being a Pollyanna. Yeah, I don't want to be that, of course. But I also, there's been a lot of negativity. And part of the reason, this book actually started as a book on optimism, and it became a book that was a checklist on church revitalization. And what got me thinking about writing the book was I was reading a lot of books that were very negative on the church. And there's a lot to critique. And the books that I were reading, like Autopsy of a Deceased Church, talked a lot about how the church needs to get its act together, and it's not in a good spot. And those are true things. But I thought, well, after you read a book like Autopsy, it's like, well, what do you do? Okay, well, I want to write the
Anatomy of Revived Church by Thom Rainer. I'm sorry, Revitalization Checklist by Sam Rainer.
We are talking about my book. You've written plenty of books, Dad. Now it's my turn.
You brought up my book first.
I did. I wanted to write a book that was kind of a roadmap for where you need to go, because I didn't see a whole lot that's out there.
And I know there's parental prejudice always involved, but it is an incredible book. I've read it, and we've got leaders waiting to get their hands on it, denominational leaders, judicatory leaders, network leaders, and pastors. and lay people waiting to get their hands on this, because it is biblical, it is thorough, and it is practical. So it's good stuff.
And
It
it's
really is.
hopeful. It's a hopeful checklist. It looks
It,
at things through the lens of encouragement and hopefulness. And while we're very real, we say realistic optimism, we're very real about where the church is right now, and you need to be very real about where your church is. You also got to believe that God can get you to a place where you need to be. If not, then what are we doing? We're not leading if we're thinking negatively.
Well, if you are not excited about some of the things that you're hearing on the church revitalization checklist, we will perform an autopsy upon you, because you're dead. You need to be excited about this. It's an incredible book, an incredible opportunity to hit the reset button in your church. That's the topic of part 1. Now, here's the good news. We're not done. Part 2 and part 3 will follow. Did you know? Part 1, part 2, part 3 will
Well, in a
follow.
3-part series, you do 1, 2, and 3.
And we will do so on the church revitalization checklist. We express optimism about the local church because we believe God is not done with her yet. We express optimism about training for the local church because there is a seminary called Southeastern. Southeastern is committed to help you get the training you need to pursue your ministry from anywhere in the world. And if you decide you want to apply to Southeastern, just put in the phrase church answers, no space, church answers, plural. And we use that code, and they will waive the fee, the application fee. So wherever you are in your life's journey, wherever you find yourself, they will help you take the next step in getting equipped to disciple and teach others. And coming to Southeastern, you'll find out that seminary is not just about theological education. It is about ministry preparation. Our thanks to all the team, Chuck Lawless, the president, Danny Aiken, Art Rayner, the entire team, the professors there, for the incredible work they do. Explore degrees, schedule a visit, or apply today at sebts.edu. sebts.edu. You can see it in the show notes. Once again, in the show notes, you'll also see Sam's new book, The Church Revitalization Checklist. You'll see how to donate Bibles to troops. We've been talking about that. That's in the show notes as well. And you'll also see Pray and Go, that resource that Sam mentioned. All of those in the show notes. You can click on and get that at any time. Thanks again for joining us today on Rainer on Leadership. Watch us on YouTube. Subscribe. What all things we say, Sam? Subscribe, like. What else we say for YouTube?
On YouTube, like. Give us the thumb. Don't do the thumbs down. Don't, please do the thumbs up.
Yes,
it'll help the algorithm. You'll help us out.
And give us a comment on
an optimistic comment, a hopeful comment, because that's what we're talking about.
Be bright and cheerful. Yes. This is the day the Lord has made. Don't go bah humbug in it. Rejoice in it. And also join us, really, if you listen to us and don't watch us, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, your favorite podcast app, give us a rating and review there. And hey, go to churchanswers.com. Great resource in partnership with Tyndale, our partner. And together, we are growing healthy churches, and we want you to be a part of that. See you in episode 2.